Okay, so what you just heard was the first minute of Bon Iver's Holocene, arguably their most famous song off their second self-titled album, and I played it the exact same way it is played in the original, which is on a high-strung guitar, otherwise also known as Nashville tuning. Now I have good news and bad news for you. The bad news is, if you want to play Holocene like the original, there's almost no way around this particular guitar setup. The good news is you can still absolutely play this in standard tuning and it's gonna sound perfectly fine. And on top of that, I figured out a bonkers way how to play note for note with all the octaves intact in standard tuning. And in this video, I'm going to show you all of that. The Nashville tuning, the note for note picking pattern, interpolated measures, and that workaround in standard tuning. I've got it all for you. This one's going to be a doozy. Now, what exactly is a high-strung guitar or Nashville tuning? To give you an idea, I'm just gonna play open strings now, one by one. Sounds quite different from a regular guitar, right? Now, why is that? First and foremost, to potentially take that fear from you, you absolutely don't need a new guitar model or any sort of special guitar. However, what you do need is a different set of strings. So regarding that, a couple of warnings right up front. Do not, under any circumstances, try to achieve the Nashville tuning with a regular set of strings. If you do, it will 100,000,000% end with broken strings. Secondly, if you only have one guitar, and unless you're a freak guitar collector like I am, that is probably the default case, I also wouldn't necessarily recommend changing your entire setup from standard strings to these high-strung Nashville tuning guitar strings. In my opinion, it is simply not worth it, simply because it's too much of a niche sound that you do not always want. Plus, and that's maybe the bigger issue here, since a set of Nashville strings has such different gauges compared to a standard set of strings, that can cause issues to the general integrity of your guitar's specific settings. More specifically, you could run into issues with the nut. So ideally, only do this if you have maybe an old guitar lying around, maybe even one you considered selling. And yeah, in my opinion, that kind of guitar is the ideal candidate to try out this tuning on. And that's what I did with this guitar. I simply really wasn't using this anymore. Now, let's get back to the gauge of these Nashville tuning strings. What's special about a set of Nashville strings is that the top four strings, so low E, A, D, and G, are all meant to be tuned an octave higher compared to a standard set. And since that is absolutely impossible with regular strings, the E through G string of a Nashville set have completely different and significantly lower gauges. So if you now play an open note on the low E string, that E is typically the same E that you would play on a normal guitar on the second fret of the D string, right? An octave up from the typical low E. The B and high E string, though, they are tuned the same exact way in the same exact octave. So now if we play the open G string, which is tuned an octave up, that G is now the same G as the G on the 3rd fret of the high E string. And what that does is it completely messes with how guitar chords normally sound or how you'd play a melody, and conversely, it makes the guitar sound, well, not like a normal guitar anymore, instead giving it almost a mandolin-like vibe. And I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say, if it wasn't for this tuning, Holocene wouldn't and couldn't be the song we've all come to love. Also, finally, please note that my high-strung guitar is tuned a half step below standard tuning. So E flat, A flat, D flat, G flat, B flat, E flat. And that's mostly because I'm terrified of the G string snapping. Okay, enough yapping from my end. Let's get back to the music. Let me break down the basic picking pattern for you. And for practicing purposes, we're just going to stay on one chord now. And personally, I like to do that not on the first chord we hear in the song, which is a C major shape. I personally prefer practicing on the subsequent chord that we linger on for several bars, which is a G sus4 shape, technically a G6 sus4. I think for practicing purposes, it's just a little more comfortable. All right, let me play the pattern super slowly for you. Alright, we're starting with our thumb playing the bass note of each chord, and well, with the C would be 3rd fret on the A string, with our G now it's 3rd fret on the low E string, and the thumb is essentially responsible for the low E string, A string, and D string, right? That's where our bass notes, our root notes for all these chords are going to be. So after this 3rd fret on the low E string with our thumb, we change to open G string with our index finger, and our index finger will constantly stay on the G string. So 3rd fret on the low E, open G with our index finger. Now 1st fret on the B string with our middle finger. And just like with the index finger, the middle finger is solely responsible, if you will, for the B string. 4th note, we go back to open G, played by our index finger. Now 5th note, bass note again, but this time not our root note, but open D string. And 6th note, now our ring finger, which is solely responsible for the high E string, open high E string. And to finish out the pattern, once again, index finger, G string, and final thumb, the final note, once again thumb, open D string, so the alternate bass note. So we kind of have this alternating bass pattern going on, but since we're playing this on a Nashville guitar, you really don't perceive it as that, as like an alternating bass pattern, right? Because the open D string is also so high in terms of octaves. Now playing it at somewhat full tempo again. Now, what is crucial about this pattern, though, is that there is a very specific accent in this arpeggio, which means that certain notes are significantly emphasized while other notes are played much more subtly to the point where you can barely even hear them. In music theory, this kind of accentuation in arpeggiated melodies is known as articulated or accented arpeggio. And in my opinion, Holocene is a textbook example of that. Let's go back to our G sus4 here, and let me pull up the tab with the accent marked in orange. So now let's reduce the riff to the orange notes only. And those are the 4 notes that really stick out. So if you look at the tab, it's an equally spread out arpeggio in semiquavers. Why semiquavers? I will explain that to you later. But yeah, it's a set of 8 semiquaver notes across half a bar. But now with this accent, there is a melody that goes beyond these 8 notes. By contrast, the other notes are played much more softly, especially the last 2 semiquavers. They're so quiet to the point where you can barely hear them. Now here's why this accent matters. Let's try playing the pattern without this accent, and ideally you can make out a huge difference. So now playing it with all notes kind of played with the same velocity. So, in my opinion anyways, if we overemphasize these last 2 notes, the pattern almost sounds wrong, which it isn't, but it seems that way since you simply don't hear these notes that clearly in the recording. If you overemphasize these 2 notes particularly, we're kind of messing with this internal melody that I mentioned earlier, right? The problem is especially that G, which is higher than the highest note of that internal melody, right, the open E, but the open G string is higher since we're doing this on a Nashville guitar. So yeah, it's kind of a problem if we overemphasize these final 2 notes. And now once more, me playing this riff, but with both emphasized and the softer notes. However, the good thing about Holocene is, once you've mastered this one pattern, you can simply take that pattern and apply it to every other chord, of which there frankly aren't that many to begin with, and it's always the same exact thing. So yeah, now we can turn to this opening C. The only difference being that our first note is not on the low E string, but on the A string. Right, once again, make sure to not overemphasize the final 2 notes. But yeah, that's the pattern for the C major. Later on, we also have the same pattern for this A minor 7, which barely looks like an A minor anymore. We just have our index finger on the first fret of the B string. Other than that, it's just open notes, the low E string not being in play here. Right, just your index finger. Now later on we have this reduced F major. Well, it's a little more complicated, but I'm just gonna use like a simplified terminology here. An F chord, if you will. Thumb on the first fret of the low E string. You can also play it like this, returning to the low E string for our bass note. And that's it. Those are our major chords: C major, A minor 7-ish, G sus4 in a way, and then this F chord. There is a small but not insignificant catch to this though, so let me now walk you through these exceptions. Alright, so we do have a couple of instances where this otherwise consistent pattern breaks. The first one being the pre-chorus, that is the "and once I knew" part. So the first half of these two bars still works more or less like the standard pattern. Thumb, index, middle, index, thumb, ring, middle, index. But yeah, it's in the second half where we really veer off, and there's definitely some variation. And based on the studio version, this is what I hear there. Starting with the lowest string, in this instance, it's the D string. Then moving on to the next string, index finger on the G string, next string, middle finger on the B string, and then the highest string, ring finger on the high E string. So we're simply moving from low to high, which the normal pattern doesn't do. But yeah, that's kind of what I hear in the studio version. And then we're just moving back up. After our highest note, we're just moving back up to the B string, G string, and the lowest string. And we end the pattern not as the regular pattern with our thumb on the lowest string, but the second lowest, so our index finger on the G string. That being said though, to be completely honest with you, it doesn't really feel intuitive to me. So in my opinion, it's totally fine to just repeat the first bar 4 times essentially for the pre-chorus. Now, the second reason why this picking pattern is altered here and there is a completely different one. And the reason for that is the song does not consistently stay in a 4/4 time signature, but it has these inserted bars here and there. In music theory, there's a fancy word for that called interpolated measures. And we can observe this phenomenon really well in the very beginning of the song already. I'm going to count along for the first few bars of the song, and you hopefully see what I mean. And we'll count in true quarter notes here, following the 2/4 snare pattern, which the song makes use of. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Some way, baby, it's part of me, part. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So right there on that A minor, reduced A minor 7 shaped chord right here, we have this inserted 1 count. And right after that, we fall back into the 4/4 time signature. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 1. Right, we just have 2 1s back to back. And in a way, you could say that maybe it briefly changes to 5/4 there, but I think it is more appropriate to once again call it an interpolated measure, since we simply counted, as I just did, as an additional 1 here. And we encounter similar insertions throughout the song in the verse pattern, but also in the chorus pattern later on. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So in that case, we don't add a 1 quarter note bar, but a 2 quarter note bar. And the same issue comes up in the chorus as well. Except for that one special moment, all the other variations, they don't really mess with the picking pattern. So I think it's not worth it to elaborate on this anymore. Alright, now if you don't have a high-strung guitar up and running in your guitar collection, there are 2 ways you can still play this in standard tuning on a normal guitar. One, you simply take your regular guitar in standard tuning, just like this one, with a capo on the 1st fret, And you simply play the pattern as I've already shown it to you. The intro, for example. The downside to that is, of course, the pattern now can't possibly sound like the original anymore. The octaves are just different on this regular guitar. And yeah, with these basic chords, you just can't recreate that. It still works perfectly fine though, in my opinion. But you do have to adjust, or rather fill out, some of these chords now. For example, our A minor 7, we now really want to play that as an A minor 7. So with our middle finger on 2 of the D string. And the same also applies to this F sus 2, which we usually just play like this. But yeah, you really want to play the full chord now, because we can't rely on the open D as part of this internal melody anymore, right? I showed you at the beginning of the song, the typical pattern has this implied internal melody. Now I'm compensating for that by playing the D here, octaved on the 3rd fret of the B string, but yeah, that's not the pattern, right? We just have this open D string, which is normally octaved. But yeah, you do want to fill out these chords. Let me just play a little bit of the verse here. Now I've saved the best for last, arguably. Here's the bonkers workaround with which you can recreate the pattern in standard tuning with all the notes in the right octaves intact. But what you do need though is 2 capos. And yeah, the first one, this one right here, we're leaving it on the 1st fret, and you can see that it's covering all 6 strings. But then you want to put a 2nd capo on the 2nd fret, but with this one, you want to leave the high E string uncapoed. Yeah, you can barely make it out, right? You can see the difference in height here as I've placed them on the guitar neck, right? So yeah, the 2nd one doesn't touch the high E string. And what we've achieved with that is that we now have an open C sharp note on the B string at all times, which we're going to need. Every chord in Holocene needs this C sharp, but since the capo on 2 doesn't touch the high E string, we also have an open F from this capo, which we also need for every chord. Now we don't need to play it with this hand, because we're going to need the fingers on all the other strings. You're going to see that in a minute. Everything else, so everything that happens on the low E string, the A string, and the D and G string, we now need to play an octave up. And that's why our first chord, essentially the C major shape, is now way up here on the neck. And for finger indications, we're now going to ignore the capo, especially now that we have 2 capos. Really doesn't make sense anymore. But since we're so far up on the neck, I'm just going to call these, and in the chord boxes, I'm going to use, as I call it, universal finger indication. I see 16 on the A string, 15 on the D string, and 13 on the G string. And there you go, it sounds just like the original, all the octaves intact in standard tuning, even though we have used this capo trick, but this guitar is still in standard tuning. Folks, let me know if you have any other questions about Holocene. Just hit me up in the comments and I'll gladly try to help you out. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your support, and I'll see you on the next video. Joe Zealand, out.